The laughter had stopped. The wind, now stronger, whirled through the park, carrying leaves into the air as if stirred by an unseen force. The once smirking faces of the young men shifted into expressions of uncertainty. Their confident stance began to waver. One of them took a step back, glancing up at the sky. "Did you feel that?" he whispered, though no one answered. The others were too focused on what was happening before them. The priest remained still, his arms raised, holding the Bible high. The sunlight, which had been partially hidden behind clouds moments before, now pierced through in a way that seemed almost deliberate. The book in his hands appeared to glow under the golden light, its pages trembling ever so slightly in the wind. Then something happened that no one could explain. A warmth filled the air, not the kind brought by the sun, but something deeper, something that seemed to settle into the very bones of those present. The group of skeptics, who had moments ago stood united in their mockery, now stood frozen, watching as if something beyond their understanding had taken hold of the moment. One of them, the same who had tried to grab the Bible, whispered under his breath, This doesn't feel normal." Another, eyes wide with disbelief, looked around at his friends. "What's happening?" The priest, his voice steady, but filled with quiet conviction, spoke. "Faith is not about what we can see. It is about what we can feel, what we know deep in our souls. And right now, you are feeling it too." No one dared to respond. The wind that had swirled so intensely around them suddenly stilled, leaving behind an eerie silence. The world seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. And then a single white dove descended from the sky. It was sudden, yet graceful, gliding through the air as if drawn to the scene unfolding below. The bird, pure and unblemished, circled once before landing gently upon the Bible in the priest's hands. A gasp rippled through the crowd that had now gathered around them. People who had been passing by, uninterested in the confrontation, stopped in their tracks, drawn in by the sight before them. Some reached for their phones, recording what they could not explain. The young men who had come to mock now stood in silence. One of them, barely audible, whispered, "This can't be real." But it was real. Something had happened. Something beyond logic, beyond reason. And for the first time, doubt crept into the minds of those who had been so sure of themselves. The priest lowered his arms slightly, looking at each of them, his expression calm but filled with something else, something stronger than words. "You asked for proof," he said softly, "but faith does not demand proof. It simply asks that you listen." The dove remained, unmoving, as if waiting for their response. The moment was not over yet. No one spoke. The group that had once laughed and mocked now stood motionless, their faces stripped of confidence. The weight of the moment pressed down on them, though none of them could explain why. The wind had stopped. The dove remained perched on the Bible, calm and unmoving, as if it had been drawn to that very place, to that very moment. It was undeniable something had happened. One of the young men, the same who had mocked the priest most aggressively, took a slow step back. His breathing was unsteady, his hands clenched at his sides. "This isn't possible," he muttered under his breath, but his voice lacked the arrogance it once held. Another turned to his friend, his face pale. "Do you feel that?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "It's like something's here." The priest lowered the Bible slightly, his expression unchanged. He had seen this reaction before, not always in dramatic moments like this, but in smaller, quieter ones when someone encountered something beyond what they could reason away. "It's not about what you see," he said gently, his voice steady. "It is about what you allow yourself to feel." The silence stretched on. People in the crowd, those who had gathered around to witness the confrontation, began murmuring among themselves. Some whispered prayers. Others simply stared. The energy in the air was unlike anything they had experienced before. Then, one of the young men, the same who had tried to snatch the Bible from the priest's hands, exhaled shakily. His eyes, which moments before had been filled with challenge, now held something else, uncertainty. "I don't understand," he admitted. "I don't know what just happened, but I can't explain it." Another, usually louder than the rest, nodded slowly. "Neither can I." A woman from the crowd, an older figure who had been watching from a distance, finally spoke. "God is here," she said softly, reverently. "I can feel it." Her words sent another ripple through the crowd. Some looked around as if expecting to see something more. Others lowered their heads, deep in thought. The skeptics, once bold and sure of themselves, now stood unsure, shaken. For the first time, the battle was not between their words and the priest's faith. It was between their doubt and what they had just experienced. But the moment was not yet over. The energy in the air had shifted. What had started as a confrontation had become something else entirely. The priest could see it in their faces, the conflict between what they had always believed and what they had just experienced. For a long moment, no one spoke. The dove remained on the Bible, unmoving, as if waiting. The priest let the silence linger, allowing the weight of the moment to settle in their hearts. Finally, he spoke. Faith is not about winning arguments. It is not about forcing belief. It is about something greater, something that speaks, not to the mind, but to the soul. Some of the young men looked down, avoiding his gaze. Others stared at him, searching for something, an explanation, an answer, anything that could rationalize what had just happened. But there were no explanations, no easy answers. One of them, the same who had mocked him the loudest, finally found his voice. "I don't get it," he admitted. "I don't even believe in this, but I felt something. I don't know what, but it was there." The priest nodded. Because belief is not always about what we understand. Sometimes, it is about what we cannot deny. The words lingered in the air, and for the first time, no one argued. From the crowd, a man who had been watching quietly stepped forward. His voice was hesitant, but filled with emotion. "I lost my faith years ago," he admitted. "Life took it from me. But watching this, seeing this, I don't know, something inside me feels different now." He was not alone. Others in the crowd murmured their agreement. Some whispered prayers under their breath. A woman wiped away silent tears. The young men who had started this confrontation had not come looking for faith. They had come looking for a fight. But now, standing in the presence of something they could not explain, they were left with questions they had never asked before. And sometimes, the right questions are the beginning of faith. But the moment was not over yet. The priest had one final message to share. The silence in the park felt sacred, as if the very air had been transformed. The priest looked at each of the young men, his gaze filled with patience, understanding, and something deeper, an invitation. "You don't have to understand everything right now," he said. "Faith isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about being willing to ask the right questions." One of the young men, the same who had tried to snatch the Bible from his hands, exhaled slowly. "And what if I still don't believe?" The priest smiled, not in triumph, but in kindness. "Then keep searching," he said. "God does not force himself on anyone. But he will always be there when you are ready." The crowd that had gathered was no longer just an audience. Many had been touched by what they had seen. Some whispered prayers, others simply stood, lost in thought. A woman from the back of the crowd spoke softly. "This should be shared. People need to hear what happened here." And so, phones went up. Videos that had started as attempts to mock the priest were now being recorded for another reason, to capture a moment of transformation, a moment that no one had expected. The priest lowered the Bible, the dove finally taking flight, circling once before disappearing into the sky. The young men, still unsure of what to do, stood watching. Some with doubt, some with reflection, and some with the beginnings of something they had never felt before. The priest took a step back, giving them space, allowing them to make their own choices. "Faith is not a debate," he said. "It is a journey, and it is yours to take whenever you are ready." Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving behind not a victory, not a conversion, but something greater, a moment that would never be forgotten. The question now was not whether they believed. It was whether they would be willing to seek the truth for themselves. And that is a question only they could answer. This video is more than just a story. It's a message of faith, transformation, and the power of standing firm in belief. If this story resonated with you, share it. Someone out there needs to hear this today. If you want to see more content like this, subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. And tell us in the comments, what do you think really happened that day? Because sometimes, the most important moments in life aren't the ones we expect. They are the ones that change us forever. The city park was bustling with life. People walked by, lost in their own worlds, unaware that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Amid the crowd, a priest walked calmly, dressed in simple robes, carrying a worn Bible under his arm. His faith had been tested many times before, but today, he would face something different. He stopped near a bench, taking a deep breath before sitting down. With a Bible resting on his lap, he lowered his head in silent prayer. But his moment of peace was short-lived. A group of young men approached, their voices growing louder as they noticed him. There were about 8 of them, some wearing t-shirts with bold, anti-religious messages. A few carried signs mocking Christianity, their smirks filled with confidence. One of them stepped forward, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Look at this, a man still clinging to fairy tales. Tell me, Father, how does it feel to know that millions believe in your stories?" The others chuckled, waiting for a reaction. The priest raised his head, his expression calm, his voice steady. "Faith is not a story," he replied. "It is a gift." The laughter did not stop. If anything, it grew louder. Another young man, emboldened by the moment, crossed his arms and spoke louder. "Your Bible is nothing but a book of myths. Stop spreading these outdated lies." Phones were pulled out, cameras rolling. They wanted a reaction, something to post online, another viral clip to prove that religion was meaningless. One of them stepped even closer, eyes locked on the book in the priest's hands. "What are you going to do, Father?" he taunted. "Defend this book of lies? It's just paper. Nothing more." The priest did not flinch. He did not argue. Instead, he took a deep breath and slowly, deliberately, lifted the Bible high above his head. His voice was clear, unwavering. "This book is not just paper. It is life. It is love. It is hope. And I will defend it always." The laughter stopped. The air felt different, heavier, charged with something unseen. The wind, which had been still moments before, stirred suddenly, rustling the leaves around them. The expressions on the young men's faces shifted, curiosity replacing arrogance. And then something happened that none of them could have expected. The priest was no stranger to confrontation. Throughout his life, he encountered many who questioned his faith, who challenged his beliefs with logic and skepticism. But he never saw these moments as battles to be won. To him, faith was not about debate, it was about something deeper, something unshakable. He had devoted years to his calling, guiding those in need, offering counsel to the lost, and standing firm in what he believed to be the greatest truth. Over time, he had witnessed miracles, not always in grand displays of divine intervention, but in the quiet moments, the way a single prayer could change a broken soul, the way faith could turn despair into hope. That afternoon, as he walked through the crowded park, he had not expected to be tested. He had simply been looking for a moment of reflection, a chance to sit in silence with the words that had given him strength for so many years. Yet, in a world that was increasingly skeptical, moments of peace never seemed to last long. The young men who now stood before him did not know his story. To them, he was just another religious figure, another symbol of something they had long dismissed. They had no idea of the struggles he had faced, the doubts he had overcome, or the depth of the faith that carried him. As they mocked him, he did not see enemies. He saw young souls, restless and searching, though they did not yet realize it. He had met many like them before, people who laughed at faith until they found themselves in need of something greater, something they could not explain. Still, the tension in the air was undeniable. The insults continued, growing sharper, louder. Their goal was clear: to break him, to provoke him, to make him falter. But the priest did not falter. Instead, he gripped the Bible in his hands, its worn pages familiar beneath his fingertips. He knew what he had to do. He knew that faith was not proven through arguments or defenses. It was shown through action, through the quiet, unwavering strength of belief. And so, with steady hands, he lifted the Bible above his head. What happened next would leave everyone speechless. The tension in the air was growing. The young men, emboldened by their own laughter, stepped closer, forming a loose circle around the priest. Their voices carried a mix of amusement and defiance, each remark aimed at tearing down what he stood for. "Tell me, Father," one of them said, crossing his arms. "How can you believe in something you can't even see?" Another smirked. "Maybe if your God is real, he'll show up right now." The priest remained still, his grip firm on the Bible in his hands. He had heard these arguments before. Different voices, different faces, but always the same doubt disguised as confidence. He knew that no clever response, no theological explanation would change their minds in this moment. Faith was not about words. One of the young men, growing impatient, reached forward, fingers brushing against the leather cover of the Bible. "You don't need this," he scoffed. "It's just a book. Just ink on paper. Nothing more." The priest's reaction was not what they expected. He did not recoil or step back. Instead, he lifted the Bible high above his head, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. "This is not just paper," he said. "It is life. It is love. It is hope. And I will defend it always." For the first time, silence fell over the group. Some shifted uncomfortably. The priest's words carried a weight they had not anticipated. The air around them felt charged, as if something unseen had shifted. Then, without warning, a wind began to stir. It was subtle at first, a soft rustling through the leaves. But within moments, it grew stronger, sweeping through the park, carrying with it an energy that was impossible to ignore. The young men, who had moments before been so sure of themselves, glanced at each other, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. "What's going on?" one of them muttered. The priest remained unmoved, his arms still raised, the Bible steady in his hands. He closed his eyes, breathing in the moment, knowing that something greater was at work. And then something even more unexpected happened.